Hello everyone, and welcome back to Hey Acrylics. I'm Heather, and today we're going to be doing some fan art for the DIY Fishkeeper, aka Joey, aka the most enthusiastic fish person ever. And I am going to stalk his Instagram account, as you see here, because that's the only way that I could find a photo of his favorite Asian arowana Buddy. Buddy was a part of the show for a long time, and I think he really inspired Joey to make his aquarium gallery. It's just this amazing room full of beautiful fish, some of which are exotic, some of which are very obtainable by pretty much every hobbyist out there. And it's just amazing to see his passion grow over the years. Now, I did use the snipping tool in order to obtain the photo of Buddy, and that's only because there are no free pictures of Buddy. Buddy's a personal pet of Joey's, so I just took it. I hope he doesn't mind. Anyway, back to Photoshop. So I opened up a 12 by 12 inch template on Photoshop because that's the size of the canvas that I'm going to be using. I'm going to use this as a reference to get an idea of how big I want Buddy to be and go from there. If I make it too small, then it's just going to be swimming in the center of a huge canvas, and that's no good. I had to be really creative to get an image of his logo. I actually had to go onto his shop and, as you can see, get a t-shirt with his logo on it, and I used the eraser tool to carefully cut out the logo. I thought it would be important to have that on there because it's become such a big part of his identity, and after watching hours and hours and hours of his videos, I just thought it was only fitting to have the logo on there. And he's the Fishkeeper. He inspires so many people to have these beautiful creatures in their lives. And that's right, I did go through this picture with the little tiny eraser tool, and it took hours. Well, a couple hours, because I did this with the t-shirt, and then I also did this with Buddy. It's a good example of what happens when your picture has a background that you have to get rid of. There are simpler ways to get rid of the background, but I needed to be careful and get all of the pixels that were necessary to print out and cut out the stencil, because if you don't have a good stencil to work off of, then it's pretty much pointless, this kind of art. You might as well just freehand paint at that point. So a little update on the last painting that I did. It is in the mail, it's on its way to its new owner, but unfortunately it got stuck at the border. I live in Canada and the painting is going all the way to Oregon in the United States, and that's going to take a while. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, so hopefully she gets it soon because I worked really hard on it and I wonder what's going on with it. Just sitting around, or something's squishing it or breaking it. Joey lives in Canada like me though, so hopefully this painting will get to him soon, and it won't take as long. As of this video airing, I have not sent it yet. I plan on sending it on Friday, which is tomorrow, and it'll probably be there by the end of next week if I'm lucky. I'll definitely get the tracking on this one just to make sure that it gets there safe. This painting took a lot longer to do than the last one, partially because of the border, and also because this stencil ends up being quite a few more layers than the last one. And I also did do this entire painting one time, and I did the colors wrong. They were too light. They didn't quite match up with the contrast that I was looking for, so I had to go back and do the whole thing again, which is why this video does not show up exactly a week after the last one. But, you know, still living and learning. And at this point, you can see that I am still going through with a tiny eraser tool, trying to figure out exactly what pixels belong with my template and which do not. And I did make a mistake on his tail, and you'll see that later. I made the mistake the first time I started painting it and the second time, which is lovely. It's always great to make the same mistake twice. Obviously I didn't learn from it, but I fixed it in the end, so that's all that really matters. Now I'm just going through and showing you the stencils and just pointing out why I picked them. The white is the most common color throughout the piece, so I picked that one to go first, and it pretty much goes from lightest to darkest, and then with a little bit of white again at the end. The dark gray, I think I had to do a couple of different stencils just for that one as well. There were a lot of tiny bits of it in the black and woven into different places. So now we're on to stencil number 5, and there ends up being 7 altogether. I printed it out 6 times, and then I also cut out one of the stencils, the first one, and I used that to add in extra detail at the end. This painting has a lot of detail in it. There's a lot of very fine cuts, and I don't know if you can see it, but I do have a band-aid on my finger. I accidentally ended up hurting myself in this process, so just another disclaimer again, if you're going to do this, be extra careful. Blades are very sharp, especially if you're doing so many stencils like this. It took me hours and hours and hours to cut it out, and lots of early mornings to do this on the side of all the other things I have going on. But it was a lot of fun, and it was very rewarding, so definitely worth it. So those are all the stencils. So I think there's 7 for the fish, and then 3 for the logo. I'm using acrylic basics. I just find that it's easy to work with, it's inexpensive, and the paint looks great. And the paint looks good, so why not use the less expensive option if the paint looks good and works well on the canvas and for what you want to use it for. I went with a blue background. I felt like that best represented where the fish would be sitting. I didn't want to do a green background and then have a fish on there. That didn't really work with what I was going for. I ended up doing the background in stages, and over the course of a couple of different days, it just ended up that it was taking a long time to dry because I had saturated the canvas so much, and you know, the thicker the paint is, the longer it takes. So instead of staying up and waiting around an extra 30 minutes to make sure that it's completely dry before putting on the next coat, I just went to bed and woke up refreshed and did the second part. Now the fish kind of fades into darkness, so I wanted to make sure that I added in dark colors in the middle. It's like I added some black, but it ends up being more like a really dark blue. This entire painting from start to finish probably took me around 20 to 25 hours to complete. That's not including the painting that I did that didn't work out either. With that one included in this, then it would have been more like 30 hours. I had it pretty much complete and then decided that I didn't like it, and that's the thing about art, is that you can get right to the end and then you just scrap it because you put so much emotion into it, and then it just doesn't really say what you want it to say in the end. And I'm glad that it worked out the second time around, because that's a lot of time to spend sitting in front of the same canvas. A little trick that I use when I'm painting and I know it's going to take more than 1 day to complete is I use saran wrap or plastic wrap, and I put it over my wet paint on my palette so that I can reuse it over and over again. It's very difficult to create the exact same shade of gray or blue that you're using when you're trying to touch things up later, so mix enough paint so that you have a lot to save and use later on in the process. Now we're on to layer number 1, and you can see right away at the tail, it's not actually supposed to have a tip like that. It's supposed to be more rounded, but I got some of the black of the background mixed up with the darker pixels of the picture. And I just go back and fix that later on, and I did realize after I already put the white there that I created the same problem as last time. But you know, it happens. Here I'm just touching up the painting. I find it easier to touch it up as I go along than to just do all of it at the end. And it's also easier to layer the paint that way. And now I'm just at the light gray layer, but there's really not much else to say right now, so I will just let you enjoy the music and watch me paint in the stencils, and I will talk to you again at the end. So stencil number 4 was a little more difficult to line up with what I had already painted. So I cut away a little bit from the stencil on some of the edges so I could line it up on the canvas. And that's what you see there along the border of the fish. And I have a blue marker around the cutouts just to remind myself while I'm doing this to definitely not put So at this point, after I pull off this last stencil, the painting is pretty much done. I did go back and do the logo separately just because of how time consuming I knew it was going to be, and this video is already going to push at about 15 minutes. So in a moment you'll see the final product. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you all next week.